The first topic is the challenge of fragmentation in the mobility ecosystem towards frictionless, seamless, affordable, and convenient mobility on demand. Our first expert, Boyd Cohen, is going to present it. Boyd is the CEO and co-founder of Iomob, a decentralized Internet of Mobility network. Since obtaining his PhD in strategy and entrepreneurship at the University of Colorado in 2001, he spent the past 2 decades focused on accelerating the path to a low-carbon sustainability economy. This included publishing 3 books, multiple peer-reviewed articles, and starting a handful of ventures in the smart cities and sustainability arena. Welcome, Boyd, and thank you for being here. Now you can share your presentation with the audience and start when you're ready, please.
Thank you. It says I don't have access to share at the moment. Oh, now I do again. Okay, great. Thanks for the intro. Thanks for the crowd. It's a small crowd, but hopefully engaged. As Giuseppe said, also hopefully we have some interaction. My presentation's maximum 15 minutes. I think I only have 5 slides. I'm actually speaking to you from Singapore, but I'm based in Barcelona. And I'm going to start my opening by asking you a question. How many of you have an app called AnyWheels? How many of you have an app called Gojek? How many of you have an app called Grab? How many of you have the LTA app? Probably none of you, unless any of you are based in Singapore or travel here frequently. I arrived a couple days ago. Those are just some of the apps I had to download on my phone just to move around the city. So what we have in mobility on a global scale, and even in urban and regional scale, is massive fragmentation. We literally have tens of thousands of shared mobility fleets around the world, scooters, bikes, car sharing, the rest. For those of you on this webinar based in Spain, you probably are aware of the pain just traveling between Madrid and Barcelona or Madrid and Valencia in terms of the different services in each city. Before the COVID pandemic, there were 22 companies who were operating scooter sharing in Madrid. Of those, one of them had an app that functioned in Barcelona. And similarly, the other way around, from Barcelona, there was almost 20 companies that had a right to operate a shared scooter service, shared motorcycle and motor scooter services, and most of them were not in both cities either. So we have a lot of fragmentation in the private shared mobility fleets. Then we have tens of thousands of public transit services with their own apps around the world and rail operators with their own apps. We have private ride-hailing operators, each with their own apps around the world. And we have 1.5 billion privately owned cars around the world. As of today, all of these vehicles are disconnected from each other. All of the companies and the public entities all want to have a walled garden, either a walled garden with one mobility service, like here's my taxi app and that's it. We're starting to see some experimentation where companies like Free Now add one extra service, like a scooter service, to their app. Or we're seeing some examples where cities or private actors are creating an aggregated mobility experience, but for one city. So what we call like an urban walled garden. Like, I don't know, some of you on this call are familiar with Moss apps like Yelby, which is a nice app built by Trafi for BVG, the transit agency in Berlin. Great. You have that app that helps you move around and access a range of services, not just one. Fine. When you leave the borders of Berlin and you go to Munich, or I was just in Cologne on my way here because I had to fly through Cologne, take a train to Frankfurt and fly out of Frankfurt. All those were separate apps. Everything is a separate app. Even when they try to create a seamless experience, it's still separate apps that are fragmented around the world, separate apps in different cities with one service or a handful of services. This disconnectivity between public, private, and shared mobility creates a lot of problems. First and foremost, it drives people to just look for the easiest solution, which is their car keys, and take their car to go from door to door because they know where their car is. They don't have to open a bunch of apps for it, and they know more or less where they can park. We all know what the problems that cause regarding congestion, air contamination, impacts on quality of life, and all the rest of it. Everybody on this call aspires to be part of the solution to more seamless mobility so that people can use shared and sustainable modes of mobility and connect them, because in the end, depends on the city, but research shows in Europe, I think something like 70% of daily trips involve more than one mode. And I don't know if it's pan-European or in some of the key markets. So if you need to use more than one mode, but you have to, each time you need a mode, you need to pull out an app. And let's go back to that Madrid example for a minute. 22 micromobility scooter sharing operators were live in Madrid before the pandemic. Okay. Let's say I know the mode I want is a shared scooter. Great. I open the door to my office building to find the nearest shared scooter, and I don't see one on my street. What is my solution? Open up 22 apps to find what the nearest one is? Like, that's insane, let alone to combine it with something else like public transit or rail or whatever might make sense for a door-to-door journey. And let's say you have that pain point in Madrid and you get on the AVE and you go to Barcelona or Valencia or wherever. Guess what? You have the same problem again, because you get to that city and none of the apps on your phone are even useful in that city. So you got to start over and download new apps and try to figure out how to combine the different services. So this fragmentation problem has a detrimental impact on quality of life, on seamless mobility for people. You know what else it does? We're embracing at Iomob something that's called regenerative crypto economics. And that's around how you can leverage crypto token economics and Web3 decentralization business models to have a positive impact on society and the planet. One thing we don't think enough about, I think, in this discussion around seamless mobility is things like Juanita. Juanita owns a 10 vehicle taxi fleet in Berlin. All right. Juanita doesn't have the money or the use case for deploying her own app. She has 10 cars in her fleet and whatever, 8, 15 drivers, whatever it is. She relies on people discovering the taxis when they're in a taxi stop or something like that. Now, you travel to Berlin, and if you don't live there and you don't know the local apps, you probably just pull out the Uber app. In a fragmented Web 2 walled garden world, you pull out Uber because you're used to it. All right, well, you pull out Uber and, oh yeah, okay, fine, they operate in Berlin, great. The nearest driver is 15 minutes away. It seems like a long time, but oh well, I'll wait. Keep in mind, Uber is increasing their prices quite a bit lately as well. So there's a negative impact on the consumer as far as the price right now. But forget that for a minute. What if Juanita has a taxi 1 block from you in Berlin? How do you discover it? You don't see it. It's not in your Uber app. So if we can democratize and create a sort of permissionless mobility network where any supplier, a startup, a small operator can connect to an open network effect, an open mobility network, we can create more inclusive economic opportunities for smaller entrepreneurs who deserve better access and exposure to their services. But not only that, that user, you in Berlin, you no longer have to wait 15 minutes for Uber to show up and charge you 40% more than Juanita's going to. You can actually take her taxi, which is a block away. So you wait 1 minute instead of 15 minutes. And also, guess what? That 14 minutes would have contributed a congestion from that driver coming all the way to you. That's no longer going to be contributing to this negative impact of the city. So when you think about this holistically, you can tackle so many pain points by creating an open mobility network where any supplier can connect and any demand partner can connect to make it easy for users to seamlessly move around the world. And that's what we've been building. You're going to hear more about this from Josep, so I won't go into too much depth. But we've built out this capability and we've tested it already in the MOLIERE project with our own modal APIs that allow us to rapidly ingest the APIs of existing fleets. We have our own journey planner that does door-to-door, intercity and intra-city journey planning to help people combine modes. And we have an API and an SDK and a white label app. And we've deployed that with MOLIERE branding and everything with the Galileo satellite data providing better micromobility vehicle location data. That's what we've already tested in the MOLIERE project. Over time, we will be supporting new forms of payment like crypto payments for users who want to do that. And we'll be decentralizing nodes, which Josep will talk about, so I won't go into that, so that other actors can deploy our architecture around the world and sort of localize and regionalize the architecture, but all the while making it interoperable. That leads me to something else I think is really interesting, is when you think about what can be enabled by this kind of open mobility network and what kinds of services could be offered. So what we're offering today is what a lot of people would consider MOS in terms of seamless multimodal mobility. We just don't have boundaries on it. It's interoperable and can cross cities. But we're going to be adding other things like EV charging, and that includes public EV charging networks, privately owned ones, and shared ones. So basically an open network effect of all of the charging stations that are open to being connected to address range anxiety more directly. We also aim to support peer-to-peer car sharing, so you could post your private car to the Internet of Mobility. If you remember that first slide, 1.5 billion privately owned vehicles, let's make them part of the global mobility ecosystem for owners of cars who are less bound to, oh, I have to own and drive my car all myself. And before you think no one would do this, there's 2 unicorns in the world that just do this already. So massive companies that already support peer-to-peer car sharing. And you might remember that 10, 15 years ago, no one thought anyone would rent out a room or their house to somebody they never met, but look at what Airbnb did. And finally, when you think about like an open mobility network, you think about what else could it be used for? Why not last mile logistics? If you're a last mile logistics company, you or your drivers don't have to own every possible vehicle that might make sense for any type of delivery that would happen in a city. You could tap into an open mobility network. And if all you need is a scooter to take Chinese food 3 blocks away, then you offer a scooter to the driver. If they need to take a box of books that's very heavy, then you offer them a car share on demand for 1 hour. I talked about, I'm wrapping up, by the way. I talked about regenerative crypto economics. This is some research we did maybe a year ago with impact investors to say, all right, if the world would embrace and adopt a mobility network approach where any service can be connected, any demand partner can access it, and any user can seamlessly move between places door to door, accessing a range of vehicles without this fragmentation problem, how many emissions could we remove from the world on an annual basis? At scale, if this type of technology was rolled out globally, we could reach over 1.3 billion tons of reduced emissions, which is a lot. It's more than 2% of total global annual emissions. So with that, I will wrap it up and take any questions.
And now I would ask to the audience if they have some questions for Boyd, please. You can jump in directly, or you can share your questions via the chat if you want, if you prefer.
Looks like there's an optimistic community. Probably has nothing to do with my talk, but they're here because they believe in the potential.
Okay. No one asking? Okay, Boyd, I have a question for you. Okay. What are the barriers, the main barriers to convincing the mobility ecosystem to expose their APIs?
I mean, I think obviously it depends on who the actor is and how big they are. You know, the larger the actor, the more investment they have, and the more private they are. So if they're venture capital backed, the largest players, they want to continue to own the customer. And they're concerned about participating in these more open aggregated models is that they lose ownership of the customer and the customer data. And that's, you know, gold for these big companies. So I would say for those companies, that's the biggest barrier, is getting them to embrace the opportunity of being part of an open network. And what we discover with them is that, you know, I think post-COVID, we found a lot less resistance than before COVID. All these companies are trying to find ways to become more profitable. And by being part of these networks, they can optimize the utility of their fleet. And the way our model works at Iomob is that we don't go B2C. So we don't sell this direct to end users like, say, Moss Global with their WIM app, but instead we work with major rail operators, airlines, and other organizations who have millions of users. Those users are appealing to the big players who would like to have access to those journeys. And sometimes users would not know about them, even if they're a big player, because that big player doesn't operate in the city where that person lives, and they haven't discovered or downloaded that app. So it's like zero cost customer acquisition and fleet optimization. And we're finding increasingly that even the biggest players are less resistant than before. So I think it's starting to become a lot easier for us to get APIs from the big players. I mean, there's a growing interest in creating a library and getting private actors willing to just open their full API for deep integration. But unless that becomes legally required, I think it's going to be a while before we see that voluntarily happening.